Question number 6, the Honourable Annette King.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker.
Tēnā koe.
My question's to the Minister of Health. Has core Crown health expenditure kept up with health demographics and inflation growth since 2009-10?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, core Crown health expenditure has risen by $3.3 billion to a record $15.6 billion under this government. In tight economic times, this increase covers all demographics and most, but not all, inflationary pressures. Under this government, it's all about delivering results that matter for patients rather than pouring money in with little to show for it, as happened between 1999 and 2008.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Is he saying that Treasury's own figures from the fiscal strategy model, which shows that in budget 2010, a real cut of $210 million, budget 2013, it records a further cut of $120 million, budget 14, which records an additional cut of $210 million, and budget 2015, which shows a total cut of $485 million, are all wrong, and he's right.
The Honourable Jonathan.
No,
Dr.
Mr
Jonathan
Speaker, what I'm saying is Mrs King is again deliberately misrepresenting the true situation. Labor are all about pouring in more money. We're about results.
Order. Point of order, the Honourable Trevor.
Mr Speaker, it's long been ruled by speakers that members are not allowed to accuse in this House members of deliberately misleading the House, as the member just did.
Order. The minister then quickly corrected himself and said deliberately misleading the House. Now, I think in this case, it's effectively... I think this is effectively saying that the minister is disputing the figures that were given. I don't see anything wrong with that at all. Supplementary question. Order. Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Well, in light of that answer, when will he stop denying Treasury's own numbers on health demographics and inflation, which shows that this government has cut the health budget in real terms in 4 of the 6 budgets, has created a cumulative shortfall of $1.7 billion, and in this year, real health spending will be almost $500 million less than what it was in 2019, figures that come from Infometrics, not from Labor or me.
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
First thing is Labor has a long history of commissioning reports which back up their own political arguments. The other thing is that we are putting in more money than ever. So $1.7 billion of new money over 4 years in the budget. But more importantly than that, we are focused on results and we're delivering the services that New Zealanders need. So more immunisations, more doctors, more operations, more appointments, frankly, a better health service than the Labor Party presided over.
Health service about that.
We'll have the supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
What services have been cut or reduced as a result of the continual underfunding? 4 out of 6 budgets since 2009.
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
The issue, Mr Speaker, is that you've constantly got to reprioritise funding in health to actually make sure it's delivering results. So my priority is changing models of care, getting more services out into the community and keeping New Zealanders weller for longer. I don't think that minister had any priority when she was in charge of health.
Order.
As well.
Order.
Supplementary question.
Stand and ask the supplementary question.
Who
Supplementary
is right?
question.
Who is right? The Minister of Health, who has cut health spending out of 4 out of the last 6 budgets, and says there's no problems, or the over 1,000 health workers and patients who have written to me in just the past day, telling us their stories of what his cuts means to them missing out on health care they need.
Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
The problem with this member is she spends half the time looking for leaked documents and the other half making up numbers and statements. The fact is we are delivering better services than ever.
Order.
I take exception to the minister saying I make up numbers.
Order. I'm not prepared to intervene on this occasion. Supplementary question, Simon O'Connor.
To the Minister, what reports has he received about Crown health expenditure?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan
Speaker,
Coleman.
I've seen reports that under this government, Crown health expenditure has delivered 44,000 more elective operations, 50,000 more appointments, 5,000 more doctors and nurses, and faster cancer services, such that no one now needs to go to Australia. I've seen another report of a doubling of the health budget, delivering 2,000 fewer operations, 6,000 fewer appointments, and jet loads of patients flying to Australia for cancer treatment. And that happened when Mrs King was the Minister.
Question, order. Question number 7, order.